Okay, so Renaissance released today, and it's time for some way too hot, way too early, way too hot takes. Um, so it's after work for me, and I had to go run some errands and stuff. I've been watching some of the discussion that's been going on around it, so and I've already read all the cards, so it's not like, oh my gosh, this is the first time I have reading them. So I do have a little bit of understanding there. And I'm also very tired, so we'll see how this goes. Maybe it'll be a complete disaster. But anyway, let's just start going through some of these cards. Acting Troop +4 villagers, cost 3, it's an action, trash this. So I should explain what a villager is. Villager is basically the equivalent of a coin token or coffers, except instead of giving you a money, they give you an action. You can play them at any point, I think, during your action phase. I don't know if you can play them outside your action if it doesn't really matter, right? Anyway, so they're just these little tokens that you can all spend whenever to get an extra action. So if you want this to not be the last action you play in a turn, this is the last action you have. You could play this. You get your 4 villagers. You can use one of those to get an action back. Now you can play another action. You've got 3 spare left over. The concept as a whole, I think generally benefits what I've traditionally called good stuff decks. People call money-ish decks, but basically decks that are more or less operating in the money density paradigm, but might add a number to many action cards. Um, but they're generally they're not like just drawing their deck or whatever. This card in particular doesn't seem that great to me, but it's really hard for me to work out. Maybe it's good. Probably some places it's good. If it's the only way of getting extra actions, then maybe it's better. The concern you have is if you're trying to like draw your deck or whatever, you're playing 3 or 4 terminal draw cards per turn, then you have to get one of these every turn to be able to support all those terminals, and you've got some issues there. You're going to run out of villagers eventually because there's only so many of them basically in the supply as a whole, but there's some synergy with like Necromancer or something. You could do some stuff. There's going to be some boards where this is very good. I think in general it's probably not very much. It's kind of like, I played like 3 villages. I think 3. Except that this doesn't draw you a card, but the village ness of them can be moved around as you need. Anyway, I think this is mediocre, whatever. Border Guard, plus an action, reveal the top 2 cards of your deck, put one into your hand, and discard the other. If both were actions, take the Lantern and the Horn. The Lantern and the Horn, so those aren't on here. I'm going to have to describe what they do. They are artifacts. What are artifacts, you ask? Well, artifacts are basically things that there are one of, and when a card tells you to take one, you take it. If nobody had it, then you just take it from, I don't know, like the game box or whatever. But if somebody else had it, you take it from them because there's only one of them. In particular, here, the horn is once per turn when you discard a border guard from play, you may put it onto your deck. So basically, you get to scheme the border guard. Lantern is your border guards reveal 3 cards and discard 2. So instead of revealing 2 and you discard 1, you reveal 3 and you get to pick one of those 3, right? Um, and on the lantern it says it takes all 3 being actions to take the horn. Because both would be, I guess, somewhat ambiguous. Anyway, border guard. This looks like pretty good selection. Um, kind of like a forum effect, but you don't get to discard the bad cards that are already in your hand. Um, and you're viewing fewer cards, obviously. So those things are less good than something like Forum or Cartographer. But on the other hand, it's a lot cheaper, and the Horn and the Lantern are things. So, um, in a good stuff, kind of money-ish deck, whatever you want to call it, um, this is good because those are often pretty high variance. Like, I want to see my golds and I don't want to see my estates. So, being able to pick is pretty good. Right? This is like a normal cantrip in a money density paradigm is equal to the average value of a card in your deck. This is going to be equal to the average higher of the two average cards. So it's like your average card plus a standard deviation or a quartile or something, 75th percentile card. So that's pretty good. Obviously, you can't just go for all of these straight off, but I think that's pretty good. In a deck that's trying to draw a lot more, this helps you find your draw cards first, and then those can find you um, your payload cards later in the turn once you're drawing everything. So this gives you some extra reliability. So it's pretty nice in just about every deck, but it's not always like game breaking. I think I'm gonna like this card a lot. I think it's pretty strong too. Cargo ship, +2 money. It's a terminal action. It's a duration. Once this turn, when you gain a card, you can set aside that gain card on this face up. So you have to show everybody. Start of your next turn, put it in your hand. So at the start of your next turn, there's going to be a sixth card in your hand, which is just like really nice. Plus, it's whatever card that you chose that you gained. So there's no downside to keeping it except that it makes the cargo ship stay out, which may be good or may not be good. You can't play the cargo ship again the next turn, basically. But that's the only downside of. And if that is a downside that is too bad for you, then the cargo ship is probably not good because like it could have been a silver, right? But if the downside isn't bad, then well, okay. The big thing about this is if you can get it on turn 3 and like buy a fiver, then that's really good because you get to play the fiver on turn 4 and then shuffle it in. But this has a typical duration or what are the tan cards called? The things that you call from your mat, tavern mat. Um, well, I'm just gonna flip over here. Reserve, yeah, that's it. Has a typical problem there that also a lot of the draw cards. It's so much better. Ghost ship or cargo ship is so much better on turn 3 than it is turn 4. Turn 4, sure, I got my fiver or my 4, whatever the thing I bought on turn 4 on turn. I get to play it on turn 5 for sure, but how good is that? It's not that good. It's not that good, right? Like you're probably playing at that shuffle anyway, and you've made your cargo ship miss the shuffle for that. And at that point, it's a significant amount of your money. So I think this is kind of risky. But on the other hand, like being able to play Mountebank turn 4 is so huge that maybe you take the risk and like you don't have to keep the cargo ship out across that shuffle if you don't want to, right? Because it says you may. Um, so I don't know. I think then later in the game, we should talk about its applications. That's mostly if you're building this kind of draw deck. Mostly, although I guess it can still like I get to play this good card that I gained a shuffle earlier continually if this isn't missing the shuffle, but it will miss the shuffle a lot. But if you're like playing a drawing deck, then like you can make sure that well this village I gained is going to be in my hand and it's an extra card in my hand. The extra card in your next hand is always, I guess, a big deal. You get a 6 card hand, or even after a discard attack, it's a 4 card hand, right? So like that's something too. I'm just not sure. I'm a little bit skeptical of the terminal space and then it missing the shuffle so much. Ducat is basically Candlestick Maker, but a treasure. Um, when you it doesn't have plus action, but it doesn't take an action to play because it's a treasure. And even if you draw it quote unquote dead, it's not dead because it's a treasure. And when you gain it, you can trash a copper from your hand. So if you have a copper in your hand, then you get to replace it with this thing, which seems nice. Potential upside anyway. Um, it's mostly just better than Candlestick Maker marginally because you get the trashing possibility, and treasure is basically a better type than action, although there's a lot of cards that care about the specific action type, so like it's not strictly better. Um, yeah, I mean, kind of like Candlestick Maker, it's useful sometimes, mostly just like when you need plus buy, it's there. It's probably, I think, a bit better than that because when you need plus buy and a little bit of copper trashing, it's there, but whatever. Um, Experiment, it's a lab that you have to return to the supply, but when you gain it, you get two. Um, so, yeah, it's comparable to Expedition, I think, and that seems pretty good, but you need to be a little bit concerned that you just don't fill up on these. Like, oh, I can open experiment, which you can do, but then you're going to play all of them, and then your deck is just back to the starting deck, so you haven't built up much. Now, having said that, like it's very explosive, and if you compare it to, say, I don't know, a silver, then the silver gets to stay in your deck longer, which is a big advantage for the silver. But this is much more explosive in the short term, so you kind of have to weigh those things. Um, I think this is going to be a card though, because explosiveness is good. It's going to be a card that you want to get uh, in quite a lot of your games. Just be a little bit too wary about being too all in on them because once they're gone, then your deck is back to being garbage. Flag Bearer is a card that I think I am a lot higher on than a lot of other people. So it's just a terminal silver, but when you gain or trash it, take the flag. What is the flag? The flag is our next artifact, and it says when drawing your hand, plus one card. So of note, you draw your hand at the end of your turn in the cleanup phase, which is so it goes action phase, buy phase, night phase, cleanup phase. At the end of your turn, you draw the card. So at the end of your turn, you draw an extra card. So when you gain this, you will get the flag. You will get to draw an extra card from it every time you gain it, even if your opponent doesn't matter what they do. Um, it's kind of cute with Changeling, I guess, because you gain this and then you exchange it for the Changeling, but you still gain this, you still get the flag. So that's cute, I guess. There's probably some other cute things. Trash for benefit, because when you trash it, you get the flag too. Um, the flag is just so good. Um, like, if you weren't able to take it from your opponent, it's just like having a what is that duration 6 cost that always stays out and always draws you a card every turn? See, I don't know all these card names. Hireling. It's just like having a hireling out, the flag is. Obviously, though, they can take it from you, and so there's somewhat of a first mover disadvantage because, well, if I get this, then my opponent can turn around and get it right back from me, and then they have it the whole time, and I have to get another one of these terminal silvers in order to take it back. So there is some first mover disadvantage, but I still think it's going to be a pretty good effect at certain points. I want to point out that if you open with this on turn one, you have a 4/3. You open with this on turn one, even if they immediately steal it back from you, you have a 1 in 6 chance because you're drawing that extra card at your turn one cleanup. You're first of all you're shuffling on turn one. You have a 1 in 6 chance of hitting 5 on turn two, and then if you miss on turn two, 100% chance of hitting it on turn three, of hitting 5 on turn three. So opening Flag Bearer turn one gives you a 100% chance to be starting a shuffle after turn three with a 5 cost in your deck. Um, Assuming that they can't somehow like attack you or something. Or I guess if they don't steal the flag back from you, then you're not starting a new shuffle, right? Because on turn three you're gonna trigger the shuffle in your cleanup phase on turn two when you draw your turn three hand. So you're not actually triggering a shuffle at that moment. Then you're triggering a shuffle earlier, so you're not at the top of a clean shuffle. But anyway, you have an extra turn of having an extra card there. So like this just seems like quite good to me. And like so then they're gonna have to take it back, and you could get to this race to the bottom of taking a lot of these. You can't take too many because terminals and whatever. So like you do have to be a little bit careful and plan a little bit ahead, but I still think it's quite strong. Like even just as a one shot, and then they take it from you as a one shot, it's like half an expedition stapled to your terminal silver. So I mean that's something, right? I don't know. Hideout is interesting. Hideout is a village, costs 4, and then after you plus a card plus 2 actions, you trash a card from your hand. But if it's, which would be insane, like think about your upgrade kind of thing, and this only costs 4. Um, but the thing is, if you trash a victory card here, you have to gain a curse. So, well, downgrading a state into curse isn't really that big a deal. The bigger deal is you haven't actually thinned the estate out of your deck because now you have a curse instead. So it takes two plays of this on estate and then curse to actually thin the card out of your deck, which makes it a lot worse at trashing, particularly the green cards, in comparison to your upgrade, your junk dealer, your sentry, that kind of thing. So if it didn't have that downgrady thing, it would be like the best card. Um, Obviously, at some point you can run out of cards to trash, but you can just, like your junk dealer upgrade, at that point, stop playing this. And because this is giving you curses, you get to keep playing it longer generally. So it's not the most reliable village, I guess, especially with other trashing, because other trashing is often going to be faster than doing this. But if you have a little bit of other trashing that's weak and estate trashing, then that can be really good. So this goes well with, say, um, Hermit or something, or Jack of all trades, maybe, maybe not Jack. I don't know. Some kind of estate trashing. Then this can pair with that kind of nicely. Probably goes fine with Jack. Um, Otherwise, it's like it's okay because if there's no other trashing, then this is still okay trashing. But you really have to think about what you want to thin at what time. If you can get a little bit of draw going with this, and you don't need the money, you might want to thin coppers first because that's going to get you to be able to draw through and do all that stuff in your deck faster. And then, like, when you have to play it twice to trash those estates, your deck is smaller, so you get to play it twice faster. I guess is what I'm saying. You're cycling through your deck. You're seeing your cards. Your shuffles are happening faster. I think this is a good card, but you kind of have to pick your spots. Some boards it's not going to be very good at all, particularly just when it's outclassed trashing wise. Um, some boards it's going to be great. Inventor is a workshop variant that's also a bridge variant. Note that, wow, this only costs. Okay, so this is a bug. It costs 4, but when I look at it, it says it costs 3. So it actually costs 4. Like if I look it up in the rule book, which I have open in another window, the rule book shows it as costing 4. So anyway, it costs 4, so don't be confused by this. Gain a card costing up to 4. Then cards cost 1 less this turn, but not less than 0. So that's the workshop text, and then the second half of bridge text. Now, workshops are usually good with cost reduction. This isn't quite as synergistic as like highway and whatever might be, because you have to play some of the gainers at least first. And if you're trying to do some mega turn with this, like you have to play 3 of these before the 4th one gains province, and that's a lot of gains. It's a lot of these to be playing in a turn. Um, on the other hand, earlier on, it can be gaining you components, so that's nice, and it can just work with other kinds of things. I think this card may be overrated to start with because the cost reduction. So this is the other thing about the cost reduction. If you're just buying a card after it, it's like a workshop that gains you a money. So like Ironworks, when you gain a silver, it gains you a money. So that's fine. Um, but I think unlike most of the cost reducers, I mean, the thing is, it's going to depend on the board. If there's a lot of good, like 4s and 5s, particularly 4s, to be gaining with it, like if both the halves are good, then it's going to be great. If only one of the halves is good, well, if it's the workshop half, then it's still good because it's a workshop. Workshop costing 3 is not that big of a boon. It's going to be better than workshop. But there are going to be a lot of boards where I think this is like worse than Ironworks, maybe, because it's terminal. I don't know. I think mostly if the workshop is good, it's good, and there's some potential for the bridge stuff to make it a lot better. But I think of the cost reducing effects, this one is the least easiest to bust, which is weird because it's stapled to another effect that works well with the cost reducing effect. But the order that stuff happens in is not the right order that you want for that combo to happen. So I think it's going to be a bit overrated, although still pretty good. Like a couple of these is fine. Improve. People seem to be really high on this, and I don't understand. It's a terminal silver. At the start of cleanup, again, this is, you discard all the cards you have in play, and then you draw a new hand of 5 cards. That's what happens in cleanup. At the start of cleanup, you may trash an action card you would discard from play this turn. So basically, that's an action you've played this turn, or a duration which you have out, and this is the last turn that it would stay out. But it has to be an action duration. So like Fishing Village, you can't improve that the turn you play the Fishing Village, but the second turn you can improve it if you want. Anyway, you may trash an action card you would discard from play this turn to gain a card costing exactly one more than it. You get to upgrade it. And of note, it does work on itself. I don't think this card seems very good to me. Like, your action cards are not usually the cards that you want to upgrade that much. Like, it's not worth getting a bad action to turn it into a better one. And well, sometimes it's like, oh, well, I can turn this action into a slightly better one. That's not no value, it's not great value. The biggest deal to me seems if there's a good spammable 4, because you can upgrade itself. So you can turn this into a 4, and then it was a little bit of money to bootstrap you early, and then it turns into something better. Sometimes if there's a trasher or something, you can turn it into something better. It gives you some pile control flexibility, and I guess some people like see that similar to Procession, but it's just like a much worse card than Procession because Throne Room is a much better card than Terminal Silver. Like, people think Duchess is awful and Throne Room is good, and okay, this is better than Duchess for sure. Um, and Procession is usually, or at least often, better than Throne Room is, and this gives you some more flexibility on what you're upgrading than Procession does. But anyway, I don't think this card is very good, but it will have a place sometimes, particularly when there's a spammable 4. Lackeys, 2 cost action plus 2 cards, kind of like Moat, but when you gain it, you get 2 villagers. So first of all, that's good. Sometimes you're just going to gain it because, like, I have a workshop effect and I need more actions because I have too many terminals in my hand. I'm just going to gain this to get the 2 villagers, and then I'm going to be able to play an extra action. Hooray! Mode effects are often fine, but just like opening this, also pretty good. You get 2 plays out of it where if you draw another action and early on in the game you're reasonably likely not to. If you draw another action dead, then you get to use your villagers, and so you get a few plays out of this before it even turns into a moat, where it's just like a lab basically. Um, so right at the start of the game, that's maybe not the absolute best thing ever, but it's at least fine. And as you're getting your draw built up, like it's a pretty nice effect to have the extra villagers just to grease you, so to basically to up your reliability, right? So I think this card is actually really really good, and I think you're very usually going to get a couple. If you have to use the villagers as your only source of village, then it's going to be hard to play a deck that is trying to draw it all. But that doesn't really make this card particularly weaker because, like, no other deck can draw it all either. And this is probably still at least a reasonable card on a board like that. But usually, I don't think you can just rely on only villagers. They're just more of extra grease. Anyway, card seems good to me. Mountain Village, +2 actions. Look through your discard pile, put a card from it into your hand. So you got to choose what card from your discard pile you put in. If you can't, because your discard pile is empty, then you just draw a card. So if your discard pile is empty, it's regular village. If not, you get to pick which card in your discard you get to put in. In the deck that most wants villages, which is the deck that's trying to draw itself, I think this might be worse than Vanilla Village, just to have in your deck even. Because, I mean, it depends somewhat on the board, but the most likely way that you have something in your discard pile at that point is because you got junk attacked or discard attacked, and so the cards in your discard pile are probably not that good. So it's kind of worse in those situations. Obviously, there's some gain and play stuff that might make it better. But then there's other kinds of decks where you're playing more of a good stuffy kind of deck, money-ish. and you have some terminals that you'd like to be able to play, and you'd like to be able to get a lot of them, and you'd like to be able to play them a lot. And this card can be pretty good there because it helps you play those more often, kind of like Harbinger, but it does it in one shot, so you don't have to set it up with another cantrip. And occasionally those decks like to have the village effect, although usually you're not that terminal heavy in those kinds of decks. So I think this is a fine card there, and I mean sometimes it's just the only village or whatever, and so it's a village there in a pinch. So yeah, Patron, action reaction plus a villager plus 2 money. When something causes you to reveal this using the word reveal plus a coffers. Coffers, coin token, same thing. Basically, this is a silver. Like if you just look at the top, it's a silver, except sometimes you get to store the villager, which is really good in this money-ish kind of decks where occasionally you're going to have terminal collision, but pretty often you're going to be able to store this. Or there's just a silver a lot. Sometimes you can store it. The reveal stuff makes this really, really good, but there isn't a ton that does it reliably. There's a few things that reveal your hand, like Menagerie or City Quarter or something, and those cards could be very busted with this. Where it's like a silver that, like, for every Menagerie you play, you get an extra coin token. So, like, it was good. Anyway, I think this card is usually going to be, like, reasonably good because a lot of decks want a silver to start with, and the villager flexibility is pretty good there. Um, and there's a decent number of decks that like silver's an actually pretty good card, and you might want a few of them or several of these. Um, the more of these you get, the less that you're likely to be able to save your villager. But in a good stuff deck, it's still good. Still silver's fine in those money density kind of decks. So I think this is a pretty good card, but it's rarely going to be bonkers. But sometimes it will be if you can somehow reveal it a lot. Priest, plus 2 money, trash a card from your hand for the rest of this turn. When you trash a card, plus 2 money. Um, Pretty down on this illustration, but anyway. This is mostly like a good opening card, I think, where uh, it's basically as good at hitting 5 for you as Moneylender is early on. It's kind of similar to a Moneylender, but you can trash your estates and still hit 5, which is nice. It's kind of like Salvager in that way, but better than Salvager early on because you get money even when you trash a copper. So there's all that kind of stuff. There's some cases where you can trash a ton of things, in which case it can, getting a few of these, you can make degenerately large sums of money. You just need some plus buy or something. Um, so it's got a lot of combos, or several combos, which can make it make a ton of money. But its main purpose, I think, is as an early trasher that still helps you hit 5, which it's pretty good. So this is, I think, good. Research, action duration plus an action. Costs 4. Trash a card from your hand per coin it costs. Set aside a card from your deck face down. On this, at the start of your next turn, put those cards in your hand. So you don't know what they are, although if you draw the rest of your deck, I guess you can figure it out. I think you can't look at this. Does the rulebook say anything? Let me see. You set aside the top. I think face down. Oh, no. The cards set aside are face down. You can look at them and other players cannot. So you actually do get to know what they are. So that's nice. But it's basically the comparison is to Apprentice. Whereas this is cheaper is the big thing. The duration means you don't get the benefit right away, but getting cards at the start of your turn tends to be getting better than getting cards later on. If there aren't enough cards in your deck, well, I guess it's the same. This doesn't stay out if you trash at 0 cost. Once you're drawing your deck, then if you use this as part of your drawing your deck, then you can't draw at all, right? Because you can't get access to the cards that you put face down. Anyway, I think this is pretty decent as an opener. Not as good as some of the others we've seen, but just as that early trasher to get through your estates, and it draws you a lot as you're getting through those estates. So that's like quite reasonable effect, but it falls off after that. Like apprenticing the silver or something is fine. Researching a silver, I think, is probably a little bit worse usually. And once you're drawing your deck, it's kind of significantly worse. But it only costs 4, so this is a fine to good card, but not great. Silk Merchant's really interesting. Plus 2 cards plus a buy. So it's like Moat with a buy. But when you gain or trash it, plus a Coffers and plus a Villager. So the first time that you play it, it's like it's a lab that gives you a buy and a money, which is really good. Although you can use the villager earlier. Like you just gain this really good with trash for benefit and like a workshop or something, right? You workshop it, you gain it, you salvager it away, and you never actually played it, but you got 2 coffers and 2 villagers off of it. So that's pretty good. If you're playing it a lot, it's a little bit lackluster. Like 3 cards in a buy is very strong, as we've seen from cards like Margrave and Tragic Hero. Uh, Wharf to some extent is vaguely comparable to that. This is like the front half of Wharf, but it's more like a moat that has a buy, which is not great. But the on gain and on trash effect is pretty good. Um, so this is going to be the timing on this is as a card in your deck, it's only okay, but as a as a gain and trash thing can be good, especially if you can trash it. If you compare that to what did we look at earlier, lackeys. Lackeys is similar. It doesn't give you the buy. And instead of giving you a coffers and a villagers, it gives you 2 villagers. Um, and then there's the trash effect and the cost. I think Lackeys is probably a significantly better card than Silk Merchant, but I like them both. It's just um, you got to time it right. Old Witch costs 5 plus 3 cards. Each other player gains a curse and may trash a curse from their hand. So if there's other cursing around, then that makes this a lot worse because you get a like you're trashing the curses that you gave them for them. Um, Now that's still worth doing a lot because they have to have the curse in their hand, which is not the most trivial thing, and it denies them a card in hand for at least 1 turn. Um, Plus 3 cards compared to plus witch to witches plus 2 cards is a lot more. Because you had to draw 1 card each time, and then you got to have a lot more cards from it. So like you net plus 2 cards here, whereas which you're only net plus 1. So in some ways it's like twice as good. Um, how big of a deal is the trashing the curse from their hand? I don't think it's that important if there's not other cursing around though, because you're still slowing them down quite a bit. Um, Unless it's like your only draw, in which case like it's your only draw. You're going to go for it anyway. You're still slowing them down a reasonable bit. I think this card is just going to be a card that you get in the vast majority of cases. And when you don't, it's going to be because there's some other Smithy variant and some other cursor or something. I think this card is really good though. Recruiter, probably the strongest card in the set. Uh, 5 cost action plus 2 cards. Trash a card from your hand plus a villager per money it costs. So this also compares to cards like Upgrade and Junk Dealer, because usually what you're going to be trashing with it first are your estates. Uh, with the plus 2 cards, you're very likely to be able to find an estate the first time you play it. And the first estate you trash with it, it gives you 2 villagers. So it covers its first 2 plays. Every time you trash an estate, it covers 2 plays of it. So if you just trash your 3 estates, the first 6 plays of this are covered as basically non-terminal. And it was like a lab junk dealer kind of upgrade-ish kind of hybrid, which is really good. Now to get the 2 cards later on, then you still have to trash a thing, and eventually you will run out of villagers, of course. But even getting a couple of these, like once you start to run out of stuff to trash, you trash one to the other, and you have a ton of villagers left. And you can even build with just like a lot of draw in mind early, and then get the villages that you would normally get later because this is giving you some of that village effect. This seems incredibly strong. Um, Moneyish decks are going to like it. The plus 2 cards is going to be good. Decks that are trying to draw are really going to like it because it gives you the drawing. It gives you that, like, just every deck likes it basically.
It's just a very strong card. Scepter, it's 5 cost treasure. When you play it, choose one. You either get 2 money or you get to replay an action card you played this turn that's still in play. So plus 2 money is just a silver. 5 for a silver is not exciting for any deck. Like, there are some decks that would take it, but it's never exciting. Replaying an action card you played this turn that's still in play. Now that's the interesting thing. But the interesting thing about that is, like, a lot of decks that want to play a lot of actions, they're trying to draw a lot. And if you're trying to draw a lot, like, a lot of your cards are going to be like Villages or Smithy variants, Terminal Draw. This isn't that great with either one of those because you can't play other actions after it. So any other actions you're drawing, you're out of luck. And then the Village effect, like the plus actions, you're in your buy phase, so you can't play more actions. So that effect doesn't help you that much. Now, drawing isn't worthless, of course, because you can draw more treasures and maybe you draw more scepters, I guess. So that's not worthless, but it's a lot less good than it is in the action phase, I think. So the biggest thing that you're going to want to copy from this is payload cards, but there aren't that many payload cards that playing them again is significantly better than just getting another copy of them. Right? This costs 5, so it's not like it's cheaper than most of your payload cards, although it's cheaper than some, so that's a thing. Sometimes they pile out, so that's a thing. And it is a treasure instead of an action, so it doesn't take as many actions to play. So if it's a terminal payload card, then this helps your terminal space a little bit. But mostly, I think that's largely a marginal upgrade, since usually you want to have extra villages for your reliability anyway. So this card is fine there, but I don't think it's absolutely fantastic. I guess the bigger thing though is, like, at a certain point, if you are drawing your deck consistently, then this is better than adding another copy because it can be a silver and you don't have to have as many actions. So if you can consistently get this with your payload card that you're trying to copy, then it's better than adding a second copy of that. Usually, there's some cards that are exceptions. So I don't think this is. Basically, my point is, I don't think this is very good, but it's not because it's like, oh, this is a horrible card to add to your deck. I just don't think it's very high impact, is the thing. Um, Scholar. This 5 cost, action. Discard your hand, plus 7 cards. So this is kind of like a library, because it draws you to 7 cards in hand. You're discarding whatever cards you have in hand, though, and getting to draw more. I think that usually makes this better because the cards in your hand by the time you would want to play a library are usually not very good cards. They're usually worse than drawing an average card from your deck. Um, this doesn't let you do the whole set a sidey thing. Library isn't the highest bar exactly either, though. Like, it's hard to build a deck with these. Um, Effectively, it works like draw to X, though, right? I guess is kind of the point that I'm saying. Um, because, like, you're never, after playing one of these, your hand size is 7, just like if you would play a draw to 7. It's just that you get a little bit of a sifty kind of effect. But I think, like draw to X, you need a lot of villages, and non-disappearing payload is good. This accommodates treasures and victory cards better than most draw to X decks because, like, if I have 3 victory cards in my hand and I can play a few other actions and then I can play this and I discard the victory cards and I get 7 more cards, it's easier for me to keep going. Whereas those 3 cards are always going to stay stuck if it was a library or something. So I think it's, like, significantly better, but still has most of the problems of draw to X. So I think this is going to be an okay card, but you're gonna prefer many, if not most, other draw options for you. Sculptor. Gain a card costing to your hand costing up to 4 if it's a treasure plus a villager. So to your hand is interesting. I think this again fits mostly in these moneyish kind of decks. It's terminal, but you can almost always gain a silver with it to make it non-terminal, or to store some villagers for a little bit for that. This seems like a maybe the most common use case to me, in which case it kind of compares to Explorer, except it's non-terminal and or saving some villagers up. So that's a nice plus. It can't gain a gold like Explorer can, which is one of the better use cases for Explorer when you're trying to just pump up your economy in a drawing your deck kind of thing. But in a good stuff deck, you're usually not getting the gold anyway. This seems better because it can smooth you out a little bit. It can also gain other stuff other than treasures, right? Um, I think you're often, if not usually, gaining a treasure, but it can gain other stuff in a pinch or whatever. So I think this is a role player. Five is really not what you usually want to be wanting to spend on your workshop variants, but I think I'm going to like this card, although it's not particularly strong. Seer. All the rest of these are 5 costs. Anyway, Seer, plus a card, plus an action. It's an action. Reveal the top 3 cards of your deck. Put the ones costing from 2 to 4 into your hand. Put the rest back in any order. Um, 2 to 4, your starting deck, you have 3 cards that cost 2 to 4. And, okay, usually you're not opening with this on turn 1. Um, Maybe it's not the greatest turn 1. It's not terrible turn 1 because you gotta, well, it will trigger a lot of shuffles, but you gotta draw some estates to filter them out of your next hand. But let's say you open silver, silver, and then you get this. Like, there's a good chance that this is cantrip that draws you a silver. Again, it's going to trigger a lot of shuffles with a lot of your good cards, so that's kind of a knock against it. And then some decks, well, with copper trashing, that helps. It gets a lot better. But the big question is like, how many of these 2 to 4 cost cards do you want to add? I think most decks want to add a significant number, which makes this card pretty good. Although again, you have to worry about it missing shuffles to some extent. It's kind of like Cartographer; you have to worry about that too. But it can draw you a lot of cards with cantrips that cost 2 to 4. It can be like the source of your draw. Um, it can draw you a lot of cards. So this can be a really good too. Although sometimes it's merely like the downside is that it's a cantrip with a little bit of reordering, and it's almost always going to draw you at least a little bit of stuff sometimes. Like, 15-20% of your deck is usually going to be costing 2 to 4. So its floor is it's pretty good but not amazing, and its ceiling is it's like drawing you 4 cards non-terminally. So usually it's going to be somewhere in between. But that's still pretty good. Like Lab is quite a good card, and I think this is usually going to be a little bit better than that. But obviously depends a lot on what else is out. Spices is a treasure, gives you 2 money in a buy, and when you gain it, you get 2 coffers. So in some respects, it costs 3 effectively. Although do note, if I remember my coffers rules right, you can't spend the coffers after you buy this. If you buy this, you've already bought something, and so you can't add more money after that. You just buy stuff. So like you can't spend more coffers at that point. Now, if you have debt, then when you go to pay off your debt, uh, then you can use these coffers. I think, if I remember right. Anyway, the point is, if it's a source of plus buy and it's non-terminal, if that's something that you need, it gives you a discount back, so it kind of effectively costs 3, though a little bit of that is delayed. The bigger deal to me is in these money paradigm kind of decks. It's not a stellar 5. Usually there's going to be some 5 that you want more, but if for whatever reason there isn't, or maybe you already have a lot of terminals, and the only other good 5s are terminals or something like that, getting the 2 coffers back is like a pretty big deal. Coffers are really good in those kinds of decks, and yeah, it just seems good. Seems good, man. In that case, so let's move on next to the next card. So I don't think this is a great card, I guess, Spices, but it's okay. And it's going to find its best home either when you just need the buy somehow, or in those good stuffy kind of decks where It's not a great five, but it's a solid five because the extra two coffers is pretty good. Swashbuckler, it's an action, draws you three cards, plus three cards. If your discard pile has any cards in it, again, if you're playing this in a draw your deck, that's either because it'll have cards in it because you've gained a card this turn already, which is a little bit hard to do since this is one of your draw things. Usually you don't want to play your workshops that early, but because of this, sometimes maybe you will. If you've been discard attacked, if you've been junk attacked, or if you're not at the top of a shuffle. Anyway, if your discard pile has any cards in it, plus a coffers. So plus three card plus a coffers is quite good. It's kind of hard to get. But anyway, then if you have at least four coffers tokens, is that redundant? It seems redundant. Coin tokens, coffers, whatever. Take the treasure chest. Now, what is the treasure chest, you ask? I think it's the last artifact. Anyways, the next artifact. No, it's not the last one. It's the next artifact, and it says at the start of your buy phase, so that will trigger the turn that you get the treasure chest. At the start of your buy phase, gain a gold. So that is really good in most decks, and well, some people are going to say, oh, but yellow equals purple. Like gaining a free gold, my man. Usually pretty good, especially if you have this much draw and stuff. Um, for a money deck, just the three cards and a coffers is amazing. It works really well if you can get other coffers to gain that treasure chest because note that you can't gain the treasure chest if you don't get the coffers from the swashbuckler, from having uh, a thing. A thing. What am I saying? Right. Um, yeah, you cannot get the treasure chest unless your discard pile had at least one card. So, um, otherwise, it's a $5 smithy. What do you want? It's pretty good. Treasurer. So I think this is going to be really good if you can get it to give you coffers with any kind of regularity, and particularly in like a good stuff deck, if you can get the treasure chest, getting free gold every buy phase is just amazing. Um, for moneyish kind of decks. Treasurer. Plus three money. It's an action. Terminal gold. Choose one. Trash a treasure from your hand, or gain a treasure from the trash to your hand, or take the key. The key is the last artifact. The key says at the start of your turn, plus one money. So this is really good for money decks, where plus a money every turn is really, really, really good. Taking the key is really good. Trashing a treasure from your hand, trashing a copper is um, fine, especially if it doesn't cost you a price point in a money deck. You like to be able to do it. But also it works well with the second ability then, where gaining a treasure from the trash to your hand, like, gee, I would rather not take a copper a lot of times, but if it's going to help me hit a price point, yeah, I'll do it. But mostly the key is really good, and a terminal gold is fine in a money kind of deck. Um, in other kinds of decks, it's like a money lender that costs one more and can do some other stuff at other points. Like if you say I'm gonna trash a treasure, you can always take the key, right? So you could just always say, well, it's a terminal gold after my coppers are gone. So that's something that's nice. Um, Nicer than moneylender anyway. But it costs five, so that's the big knock against it in those kind of decks. Because usually you want your moneylender to help you to get to five, not because you've already reached five. So I think it's really going to be more at home in money decks, but it can be good in the other decks too. Gaining a treasure from the trash of your hand, like having the optionality is at least nice, and then sometimes good treasures actually go to the trash, so that can be a thing too. Villain, the last kingdom card here. Again, we have a visual bug here. It costs five, not four. So this is right, this is wrong. Cost five, plus two coffers. It's an action attack. Each other player with five or more cards in hand discard one costing two or more reveals they can't. This attack is kind of hard for me to judge. It's obviously worse than, like, say, a pillage attack, because you don't get to pick exactly which card. Costing two or more means a lot of times, depending on what the trashing situation is like, it's going to be discarding a state, which is, like, not very good. But if they don't have estates, or if they need the estates for, like, Baron or Shepherd or something, then this gets significantly better. Um, Making them discard if it's like a silver or something, it's pretty decent against a money deck. Um, Against a drawing deck, if it gets their only village or their only terminal draw card, then that's nice. But usually, it's not going to get their only one of those since they have 5 cards in hand, and their other 3 cards would have to be payload that doesn't cost 2 or more, which seems unlikely. So you're not really going to hit the only key thing. It's kind of just like discard a card there, which ain't nothing, but plus 2 coffers. Um, yeah, that's better than a terminal silver, but not a ton better. So yeah, probably one of the weaker cards in the set, I think. But still will have a place sometimes. All right, there's still a lot of projects here, which I'm going to cover as well, but this is enough for me for now, and I got to go do something else, so we'll get those in another video. So look out for that one soon. For now, this has been Wandering Winter with the first part of my hot takes on Dominion Renaissance. And thanks for watching. Please leave comments, and I'll talk to you again soon.